Welcome back. We're ready to read another chapter of our book, Cracker, The Best Dog in Vietnam by Cynthia Katahata. When we last read chapter 4, Cracker had begun training, and at first she resisted it, but she's at Fort Benning, Georgia, and she's training how to become a dog for the military. And they were trying to get her to go just walk on a leash with her new handler. His name is Rick Hansky. And she did not want to do that. So we know that she was taken away from her original owner, and his name was Willie, because he could not keep her. His dad lost his job, and they had to move into an apartment building in Chicago, and they weren't allowed to have pets. So this was the only choice that Willie had. And so he gave Cracker, who is a German Shepherd, to the military to be trained. And we also know that Cracker is from a famous line of show dogs. The only reason that she is not still on the show circuit is because she had broken her back leg when she was little, and she's no longer. It has a different look to it, so she doesn't pass those criteria. So let's start off and read chapter 5 and possibly 6 today of Cracker. Cracker liked training a lot now. She had fun doing what Rick wanted the second she was sure what it was, or sometimes even the second she thought she knew what it was. Back with Willie, she felt like she was the center of the world. She didn't quite feel that way with Rick, but she felt she was doing important work. She liked that. Cracker's favorite part of her new life was when they started going out into the field and finding men hiding in bushes, guns buried in holes, anything that smelled or sounded wrong. Rick taught her what was wrong, like wind whooshing over a taut string, the smell of gunpowder, growling at other guys, a hole dug in the ground hidden by leaves, and especially biting certain people. That happened only once, and it wasn't really her fault. The guy had reached out really fast, and she'd been surprised, so she didn't see how Rick could blame her for that. Then sometimes they would spend the night out there, and she would lie in the darkness with images of the day drifting through her head. She would see the food she'd eaten, or hidden men jumping out of the bushes. Other nights, she would listen to Rick, Cody, and 2020 talk. Every so often, as they talked, she would hear a Cracker in their conversation, so she would listen more closely, but she didn't know what they said. She always stuck with Rick. She felt the absence of Willie, but it wasn't an anger anymore. She had started to feel happy whenever Rick was around. He would pet her even while he talked to the other men. She liked that. Rick, too, would often lie quietly under the stars and think of the day, usually of how well Cracker had done and how well he felt the two of them were starting to understand each other. As a matter of fact, he thought she was going to whip the world. The previous week, on the way to a training session, he'd inadvertently made a crawl gesture, and Cracker immediately crouched and looked up at him, ready to crawl. A number of times she lay down when he'd only just placed his tongue to the top of his mouth to pronounce down. Previously, this had bothered him, but she'd gotten the timing so exact that she didn't do it before he wanted her to. But she still did it before he finished speaking. In fact, he got the feeling she was getting the timing perfect, that getting the timing perfect was one of her favorite things. Even on the day they'd practiced flying on the helicopter, she seemed intent on jumping onto the chopper at the precise moment that he did. Cracker loved the chopper, how the scents of the air flooded her and vanished almost simultaneously. Everything Cracker could feel on the outside, she could also feel on the inside. The squad was also supposed to practice rappelling that day. That was when you put on a harness and jumped off with your dog. But the chopper malfunctioned and they ended up skipping that. After about 6 weeks, they started what Rick figured was the most important part of training. So far, they'd searched for booby traps and personnel that had fallen, handlers that already knew the location of. Finally, they were going to spend a week biovacking with their dogs and searching for booby traps and personnel whose locations were unknown to them. Before this aspect of training, a bunch of guys planned to take their minuscule paychecks and have themselves a weekend of fun in Atlanta. But Rick didn't get a pass, and Cody in 2020 decided to stick around. Rick didn't much like the big city anyway. Saturday morning, the sun warmed the back of Rick's neck as he, Cody, and 2020 walked to the kennels together. Cody and 2020 had become good buddies of his. Though they didn't have a lot in common, Rick was glad to know he'd had a couple of pals in Vietnam. Cody and Rick were from fair-sized Midwestern towns, and 2020 was from Phoenix. Cody hardly ever worried, while for no particular reason, 2020 worried all the time. Rick wasn't much of a worrier either. On those rare occasions back home, when he did worry, he just went to the shop, in the garage, and sanded a table or fixed a chair. After they took out their dogs, Cody had told them about something he'd seen on TV, some variety show he'd obsessed over. The whole idea was to get their 3 dogs to move in unison, dancing dogs, Cody called it. It worked great. The dogs learned it in about 3 minutes. Left paw, right paw, heel, heel. It seemed like they had a half a dozen guys in camp watching them. Finally, they got chewed out by a lieutenant colonel for playing with the well-oiled military equipment. That is, the dogs. So they put the dogs away and went to mail call. Rick had learned that when you got to Vietnam, you lived for mail from home. Rick got regular mail from his family, of course. And about once every week, Rick had been getting letters from this Willie kid. Rick wrote his parents about the training, trying to make it sound as fun as possible, and then told them they had to be starting an important aspect of training soon. He asked about the family and so forth. Just the usual stuff. Yet it felt good. It made you feel like you were still part of the real world. He didn't write the kid back, though. He only had so much free time. He tried once, but he didn't want the boy to think that he might get Cracker back someday. He wouldn't. That night, after he dropped off his mail, he ate with his buddies in the mess hall, chowing down on some pretty decent hamburgers. They weren't like Mom made, but they weren't half bad. So does U-Haul have it out for me or what? Rick said. Cody laughed, sharing his mouthful of food with the table. Oh, man, Rick said. Close your mouth. That could get you banned for life from his house. 2020 said, for all intensive purposes, many teachers I've had in life seem to like some students more than others and some students less than others. But sometimes, and again, for all intensive purposes, the students they seem to like less were occasionally their favorite underneath it all. It happened once in herpetology course I took. Herpetology? Rick said. That sounds like some kind of disease. It's the study of reptiles and amphibians. Studying that crud ought to be illegal, Rick said. You going to finish those fries? I already got dibs, said Cody. Since when? I asked him yesterday because I heard they were having burgers today. Cody grinned. A line of ketchup squiggled down the front of his shirt. 2020, who was meticulous about his person, said, you got ketchup all over your outfit. Outfit? Cody and Rick cried out in unison. Did you just say outfit? Cody added, my sister wears outfits. The guy from another table yelled out, it's uniform or fatigues or something. But one thing I know is I ain't wearing no outfit. They all howled while 2020 wore his usual serious expression. When they finished eating, it was still warm out. Sometime after dinner, Rick, 2020, and Cody caught a Jeep toward the kennels. For the return trip, they caught a delivery truck. Today, Rick, Cody, and 2020 decided to catch a late Jeep. The sky was growing dim, and the sun slanted into Rick's eyes. Hey, your mom still want to get that Bichon Frise, Rick said. 2020 said, it's pronounced Bichon Frise. It costs $300. Where's my dad going to get $300? But she says it looks like a cloud. Rick laughed. $300 for a cloud? Cracker, Bruno, and Tristy sat patiently at their individual kennel gates. But when they saw their guys, the impatience turned to near hysteria. As soon as the gates opened, Cracker and Tristy tore across the field, Tristy nipping at Cracker's back leg. Finally, they circled back to see their guides. Bruno just watched in his stately manner. Rick, Cody, and 2020 sauntered across the field with the dogs. Tonight, for some reason, grasshoppers or something were jumping all over the place. Rick swatted one away while the dogs, even Bruno, went after them. Cracker jumped up and grabbed one in her mouth. Yuck. She let it drop out. Then she went to sit next to Rick, resting her head on one of his legs. I heard they eat grasshoppers in Vietnam, Cody said. Ever try it? Rick and 2020 looked at each other. Ever try what? Rick finally said. Eating a grasshopper, Cody said, as if it were obvious. 2020 flapped his hands with exasperation. Just because they eat them in Vietnam, if they eat them in Vietnam, doesn't mean you have to try it. That's why we live in America, so we don't have to eat crap like that. Cody shrugged. That's not why I live in America. I was born here. Rick laughed. I don't know if they eat grasshoppers or not, but I do know that I ain't trying one. He lay back on his elbows and lit a cigarette. 2020 and Cody were great friends, but they fought like an old married couple. He flashed on a memory of his maternal grandfather shortly before he died. They used to keep chickens in the barn for dinner. He killed them by grabbing their heads and shaking them in a circle. One night when his grandpa was getting really old, he went out to get the night's chicken. When he took a long time, Rick's mother sent Rick out to check on him, and there was Grandpa, shaking the chicken in a circle by its feet, while Grandma screamed at him. Rick, who was only 7, tried to calm everybody down. Grandpa and Grandma bickered and screamed a lot at the end. The poor chicken was the only calm thing in the barn. 2020 couldn't stop. I mean, the reason America is America is not that we don't eat grasshoppers. You're so literal, man, Cody said innocently. Literal? It's human language. It's words. You have to say what you mean. That's what words are for. Rick laughed again. I'm glad I'm not either of you, because you're both nuts. He watched the dogs leap through the air for the grasshoppers. The dogs looked like grasshoppers themselves. He never realized what springy legs dogs had. That is, he realized it, but he'd never looked at dogs as closely before as he did every day now. In the backyard of somebody's house, they didn't seem like anything but friendly furry things. But out in nature, they were pretty darn impressive. The delivery truck honked and Rick jumped. Cracker, come. He and his friends put the dogs away and hopped on the truck. Monday morning was hot as a summer day, but you all seemed to think the weather was some kind of gift from the heavens. Perfect training weather for Vietnam, men. The platoon was trucked over to the kennels slightly later than usual, so most of the dogs were already sitting in front of their gate waiting. Rick looked down at the row of men and dogs and saw the faces of both light up as they saw each other. Many of the dogs jumped up and down. Cracker barked a couple of times, as if to reprimand Rick for being a few minutes late. Sorry, Rick told her. She pawed the gate, but she forgave him.